The latest surveys of a few international research institutes have reviewed important findings on people's perception of China and related geopolitics from different countries. Which countries hold the most unfavorable view of China? What threats do countries fear the most from the CCP? What are Americans' biggest concern? What's the number one issue the free world cares about China? And which country is best suited as a world leader? Hello everyone, welcome, I'm Lei. Welcome to Lei's Real Talk. The Pew Research Center, a leading American think tank, released a country survey about China on June 27th. The report, which surveyed nearly 25,000 people in 19 countries, found that the country that has the most unfavorable view of China is Japan, followed by Australia and Sweden. The percentage of people who hold negative views of China is 87% in Japan, 86% in Australia, and 83% in Sweden. The United States ranks number 4 with 82%. In the United States, 76% of people had a negative view of China last year, but it went up to a record high of 82% in 2022. That means more than 8 in 10 Americans see China unfavorably. In Canada, roughly 7 in 10 people have this unfavorable view, also setting a new record. Japan is the country that not only has the worst view of China, but also has held this view for a long time. Roughly 9 out of 10 Japanese have viewed China unfavorably for the past 10 years. A few European countries also saw negative opinion of China setting a new record. The Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Poland, Hungary, and Greece. Although many more Europeans see China in a negative light, they don't necessarily believe their country has a bad relation with China. In Sweden, the country in which 82% people don't think favorably of China, half of the people think their country has a good relation with China. This 30% disparity should make Swedish politicians concerned. When the overwhelming majority have an unfavorable view of China, but believe the government maintains good relations with the CCP, that means your friendly China policies are not supported by the people. But Sweden is not the only country. European countries generally all have this problem. The majority of Europeans believe that their countries have good relations with China, even though they don't view China favorably. The 3 countries that have the worst problem are the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain. When I compare people's view of China to the perceived relations between the 2 governments, there is an over 40% gap. Perhaps it's time European leaders adjust their China policy, or you will have surprises at the next election. I want to emphasize one key point. The negative feelings people have towards China isn't necessarily targeted at Chinese people or Chinese civilization. It's targeted at the Chinese Communist Party or the regime. The regime doesn't give the people much say and always acts on behalf of the people, so it should be responsible for this unfavorable view. The Pew Center's poll has given us some clues. Australia, Japan, Malaysia, and Hungary are most concerned about the threat posed by the CCP's military power, with Japan having the highest concern at 60% and Australia at 57%. What about the United States? What are Americans most worried about in relation to the CCP? Americans' number one concern about the CCP isn't the military threat. They are most worried about the CCP's involvement in the U.S. government and its domestic politics. 47% of Americans worry about China's influence in the U.S. politics, while 43% are concerned about a military threat. And another country that's also concerned about the CCP's political infiltration is South Korea. The percentage of Koreans who are concerned about the CCP military threat is 46%. But those who worry about political infiltration is 54%, which means that more than 1 in every 2 Koreans worry about the CCP's influence in their domestic politics. This is probably one big reason why Koreans didn't vote for political candidates who are perceived as pro-China and elected a pro-American candidate to be their current president. It's also noteworthy that a June 23rd Pew Center survey shows that the U.S. public believes that the United States is losing international influence while China is gaining influence. 47% of Americans believe that the international influence of the United States is weakening, while only 10% believe that China's influence is weakening. In contrast, 66% of Americans believe that the CCP's global influence is strengthening. This view is shared globally. 66% of respondents in 19 countries believe that China has been getting stronger in recent years. Those with more education seem to believe more that China's influence has grown, particularly in Europe and the United States. However, education level is lesser a factor in Japanese and Australians' perception of China's growing influence. This question actually reflects the number one China issue important to the international community. The survey found that as many as 79% of all global respondents believe that the CCP's human rights abuses are the most serious problem. From the CCP's two-decade-long persecution of Falun Gong, which has torn apart millions of ordinary Chinese families, to the crackdown on the Hong Kong pro-democracy students, the persecution of Tibetans and Uyghurs, to how ordinary citizens who lost their lives and livelihood during the atrocious COVID lockdowns, 70% of the respondents in 19 countries believe that nations should promote human rights in China, even if it harms their economic relations. The Western ally countries that are most supportive of China's human rights over economic relations are overwhelmingly European nations. Sweden at 87%, United Kingdom at 83%, Germany and the Netherlands at 78%. Australia and Canada did well as well at 76%. Unfortunately, the United States and France seem more practical. Their support for China's human rights over business fell below the international average at 70% and are at 68% and 65% respectively. In March, after Russia invaded Ukraine, American polling company Gallup asked Americans who they think is the biggest enemy of the United States. For 2 years in a row, China or the CCP took the top spot with 49% of votes. The second space went to Russia with 32%. Gallup also found that 67% of Americans view China's military power as a critical threat. That's 26% higher than the 2016 poll. Coincidentally, the Lowry Institute, a leading Australian think tank, has also released a survey which found that 75% of Australians believe that the CCP will become a military threat to Australia in the next 20 years. When there are enemies, there are also friends. The survey also found that the majority of Australians consider Japan to be their best friend in Asia, with a 43% approval rate. However, 8 years ago, in 2014, only 29% of Australians identified Japan as best friend, which was surprisingly the same as China, also at 29% in that year. Now, those believe that China is Australia's best friend fell to 6%. China has reviewed its ambition to overtake the United States as the world leader, but in the eyes of the people across nations, who is most deserving to be the world leader? According to a study titled International Views of America in the Biden Era, released by the Eurasia Group Foundation on June 15th, as many as 73% of respondents believe that their country would be better off if the United States assumes the world leadership role, while only 27% believe that it would be better if China were the world leader. The study is based on surveys of people from 9 countries: Poland, Germany, Japan, Brazil, Mexico, Nigeria, India, Egypt, and China. In the Australian study by the Lowry Institute, The most trusted country to Australians is Japan, with an approval rate of 87%, while the number of those who trust the United States is 65%. However, only about 10% trust the CCP. Last but not least, let me end by mentioning the approval rate of Chinese leader Xi Jinping, per the Pew Center's survey. Overall, 76% of people around the world have no or not too much confidence in him. The countries that have over 80% of people with no or little confidence in Xi are Japan, South Korea, Australia, Sweden, and France. The countries that have the most confidence in him are the only two Southeastern Asian countries in the survey, Malaysia and Singapore, where 62 and 69% have some or lots of confidence in Xi Jinping. Hope this is helpful to you. It's a lot of information. It's eye-opening, isn't it? That's all for today. Thank you. See you next time.